Yo, Julius, this is your girl Raven Chapman, the Omen. Just want to give you a big shout out here from the UK. Ring IQ, you're the man. Thanks so much for your support.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. This past weekend, unbeaten up-and-comer in the featherweight division, Raven Chapman made her Queensbury Promotions BT Sport debut against Gabriella Mezei, who she dispatched just a few seconds into the first round of what was a 6-round contest, thereby exhibiting all the skills.
I rant and rave about her all the time.
For context, Gabriella Mize is a veteran of 46 professional contests, 46 professional bouts, and in that way, even though she has an upside-down record, a losing record, she still is a more experienced fighter than young Raven Chapman, who going into this fight only had 2 professional contests, 2 professional bouts. And you see how quickly she dispatched her. What that communicates is that Raven is ready for tougher challenges and tougher opponents. At only 3-0,
Just a few fights, I think she'll be ready to beat the likes of a Sarah Mahfoud.
Sarah Mahfoud, this division's reigning IBF champion. I'd give Raven Chapman at least 3 to 4 more fights.
Honestly, she might be ready before that.
So just to be on the safe side, you give Raven Chapman 3 or 4 more fights, and she'll be ready to challenge the likes of a Sarah Mahfoud for an alphabet title, because that's the kind of ceiling she's got, and that's the kind of fighter that she is. Because this contest,
The fight only lasted a few seconds.
what you have to get Raven Chapman now are rounds in the bank, professional experience. She has all the talent and all the ability, she just needs the rounds. So it behooves her handlers to get her back out there and get her back out there in a jiffy, because this fight didn't last very long.
Raven Chapman needs to be on a schedule like the schedule we're seeing in reference to Skye Nicholson.
Having debuted as a professional in March of this year, she's already fought 3 times, going on 4. She's got another fight in the books, another fight scheduled, her 4th.
She's supposed to be getting back out there early next month on the undercard of Ogawa versus Cordina.
Skye Nicholson, like Raven Chapman, is an unbeaten up-and-comer in today's featherweight division. Featherweight, that's 126 pounds. And you see that Matchroom is sparing no expense to keep Skye Nicholson busy and get her as much experience as possible, as often
As possible.
I'd like to see Raven Chapman on a schedule like that. I think that given that her fight didn't last very long, and it was her first fight of this year, it behooves her handlers to get her another fight as soon as possible, get her some rounds in the bank. I'd like to see Raven Chapman fight a minimum of 3 to 4 times this year, because that's
the kind of schedule you want to keep an unbeaten up-and-comer on, a blue-chip prospect.
they both are. Both Skye Nicholson and Raven Chapman, they're just on opposing sides of the street. Raven Chapman's with Queensbury on BT, and Skye Nicholson is with Matchroom on DAZN.
I think it'll be a while before we see either fighter challenging for a world title. They both need some experience, just a little more.
Just to be on the safe side, there's no actual need to rush either fighter into world title fights. It's just the ceiling that the both of these fighters exhibit. Raven Chapman, Skye Nicholson, you know they've got what it takes. They've got that it factor.
I say it all the time. You'd never know it to talk to her. You'd never know it to talk to Raven Chapman.
She's a fierce fighter with killer instincts, real killer instincts.
When it comes to Skye Nicholson, Australia's own Skye Nicholson,
She's going to be getting back out there early next month on the 4th on the undercard of Ogawa versus Cordina as specified, and she's going to be taking on seasoned journeywoman Gabriella Bouvier.
and this is Skye Nicholson's 4th fight this year.
This will be Skye Nicholson's 4th fight as a professional boxer and her 3rd fight against an opponent that actually has a winning record, more victories than losses.
Very ambitious youngster.
With a lot of speed and generous dimensions for this weight, she's a long, rangy fighter, a southpaw.
Who's been showing more aggression and power fight by fight.
I've seen every single one of Skye Nicholson's fights, and you see the change, the gradual change in her from an amateur style to a pro style, fight by fight, to where now she's not just picking her shots and boxing her opponent, she's looking to do damage, and that's what you want to see in a standout amateur that goes pro.
Not just piling up points, you're inflicting damage.
She looked fan-fucking-tastic against Shaniqua Davis on the undercard of Taylor versus Serrano. Left a long-lasting impression, showing improvement.
She's fought in 3 6-rounders so far. This is going to be an 8-rounder.
They're moving her fast. Before you know it, she's going to be fighting in 10-round fights, and once she does, she'll be ready to challenge for a world title. With Skye Nicholson, much like Raven Chapman, you're dealing with a blue-chip prospect who is already exhibiting elite-level qualities, and it won't be long before Skye Nicholson is ready to challenge for a world title. You wonder if Erica Cruz, this division's WBA champion, is still listed as a matchroom fighter. We haven't heard much news about her.
Not since November of last year when she defended a title against Melissa Esquivel.
I will say, of all the world champions at 126 pounds, the weakest one, the weakest link in the chain would have to be Denmark's Sarah Mahfoud. And that's not saying that Sarah's a bad fighter.
No, she's not a bad fighter, but styles make fights.
And Sarah Mahfoud's textbook style is a lot easier to deal with than the awkward come-forward aggression of Erica Cruz, who hails from high altitude.
I think she's from Mexico City, and those high-altitude fighters that come from high-altitude places, they got engines.
Great gas tanks. They can keep the punches coming from the opening round to the 10th and final round. I happen to think that Sarah Mahfoud is a more beatable fighter, a more beatable champion at this point than Erica Cruz is, but it's Erica Cruz that Matchroom signed, though I do wonder if she still is a Matchroom fighter, and if it's Matchroom's intention to have Skye Nicholson take on Erica as opposed to Sarah, because I'll tell you right now, Sarah's more beatable than Erica is. It'll take a lot more fights for Skye Nicholson to be ready for Erica as opposed to Sarah. And, we'll see what happens. We'll see what develops.
She's tougher to beat.
Erica Cruz is. She hasn't fought yet this year. She was last in action in November of last year, and it's for this reason I question as to whether or not she still is in bed with Matchroom.
If she's not, it begs the question as to why they even signed her.
What thought process went into that when their unbeaten up-and-comers are a ways out from actually challenging for alphabet titles?
I don't know. We'll see.
In other news, bit of information that comes as a surprise to no one. We all saw this coming. Canelo Alvarez will, in fact, be taking on Gennady Golovkin for a third time this upcoming September. A sensible and sensible choice for Canelo Alvarez, who's coming right off that loss to Dimitri Bivol at a time where he's hard-pressed for answers. How do you beat a guy like that?
I don't know, but you can make some money with Gennady while you figure it out.
I've often talked about how a lot of people, they're going to try to poo-poo all over this fight. They're going to try to shade it, try to downplay it, but this is, in fact, one of the most commercially viable fights you can make for a U.S.-based audience. There still is a lot of interest in this fight, even if the initial reaction in some circles is adverse.
Don't ever be fooled. This fight still makes a lot of fucking money.
I don't want to jump to bold conclusions and make bold proclamations, but Canelo Alvarez is a fighter who sold 800,000 pay-per-view buys on the Showtime platform with a little-known super middleweight champion that goes by the name of Caleb Plant. More recently, he sold approximately 600,000 pay-per-view buys.
600,000 pay-per-view buys are a little bit over that with a little-known Russian light heavyweight champion.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's safe to say that he can do better, much better than that, with a familiar face, a more familiar fighter in Gennady Golovkin, who has a fan base, a core fan base of his own that still support him and still watch his fights.
Don't let the naysayers on the internet fool you. This fight is big.
DAZN debuted in America in, 2018? And ever since then, they've been pushing to get this fight over the line.
They know this is still a very attractive fight.
Still commercially viable in several markets, not just a US-based audience, a US market, but a European one as well. It won't be a pay-per-view there, It won't be a pay-per-view in the United Kingdom and parts of Europe. It'll be a North American pay-per-view.
But remember, this is a subscription-based platform.
This isn't a terrestrial or linear network. This is a subscription-based platform. So anybody watching this fight,
you're in their wallet.
This ain't like doing a fight on Fox and it brings you back 1 million views or 2 million views and it doesn't cost the viewer anything. No, this is a subscription-based platform. So anybody in the United States or parts of Europe, one way or another, they're going to have to pay to play.
Well, it'll be more expensive for anybody in North America. It will.
Better still, this is a subscription-based platform. So in order to view the content, you have to pay to play.
It's that simple.
They're going to make a killing off this thing. You often hear from the critics that DAZN isn't value for money, that they're not staging fights that are as good as what you get on Top Rank, what you get on Showtime, when nothing could be further from the truth. Some of the biggest fights in boxing are all happening right there on the DAZN platform.
Joshua versus Usyk wasn't a big fight. The rematch, that's not going to be a big fight.
Canelo versus Saunders wasn't big. 73,000 people showed up to see that thing. Canelo versus Bivol 1. Canelo versus Golovkin 3. And potentially Canelo versus Bivol 2.
Those ain't big fights.
The Boo Birds have already started harping. One Twitter user that goes by the name Ranger Rollins says, "This is the type of bullshit that pisses me off about Canelo. Holding all the belts and then pulling the I don't care, I'm busy routine. paralyzes an entire division indefinitely because the amount of special exceptions made for him is essentially finite.
What the hell does he mean, paralyzes the division?
How is Canelo Alvarez stopping the PBC from making fights and pay-per-views amongst themselves, involving their own stable of PBC fighters? How is Canelo fighting Golovkin for a third time stopping Jermall Charlo from fighting David Benavidez? Or how does he stop David Benavidez from fighting Caleb Plant or David Morrell or just any one of those guys that are on his side of things? How is what Canelo's doing stopping them from having their own fights and having their own careers, their own pay-per-views?
He's not stopping them. Their problem is they're all trying to ride his wave. They're all waiting for him.
They're essentially stopping themselves, and if I'm being honest, those guys are on the wrong side of the street.
Where have you heard that before?
It's all sides of the street and big fish until it applies to PBC fighters, isn't it? I mean, isn't that what they told Terrence Crawford for year after year?
That's why a lot of these guys resent Canelo Alvarez so much.
Even coming right off a loss to Dimitri Bivol, he still commands a large enough audience that all the shenanigans they pulled on Terrence Crawford, they can't pull on him.
You can't sides of the street and big fish this guy, but he can do that to you.
He can do what he wants because he doesn't need you. He's perfectly capable of having big fights, very big fights, without you and your stable of fighters. And really, that's where the criticism and resentment comes from. They'll claim that somehow Canelo Alvarez is paralyzing a weight class when the PBC's got plenty of fighters and plenty of fights they can make amongst themselves. They just don't want to because they want to ride this guy's wave.
Well, you're on the wrong side of the street with that boogie board, sweetheart.
PBC has a potential marquee fighter, a potential star in David Benavidez, who is exhibiting some drawing power. But if you want to launch his career to that next stratosphere, you got to crack a couple eggshells.
Somebody's O has to go.
You know what they say, to make an omelet, you got to crack a couple of eggs. That's what you have to do. There's no reason at all.
Nobody's stopping them from making a Benavidez versus Charlo fight.
Or Charlo versus Plant, or Plant versus Anthony Durrell, or whoever the hell it is he decides to rebound with. I mean, really, no one is stopping them. For the longest time, they've been a biosphere.
They've got their own little ecosystem over there.
And in many instances, they've been happy to isolate themselves from everyone else's fighters, except when it comes to Canelo Alvarez. When it's Canelo Alvarez,
the same people that spend 7 days out of a 7-day week trashing Canelo are mad that he won't acknowledge any of those PBC guys.
Oh, I thought he sucked and he was a fraud. He's coming off a loss to Dimitri Bivol. What do you need his acknowledgement for? You've got Jermall Charlo.
Didn't they used to say that Triple G was a hype job built by HBO?
So what the hell do you need him for? You've got the Mexican monster, David Benavidez. Didn't he just trounce David Lemieux?
Ain't you got boxing's equivalent of Gandalf the Grey and Al Heyman?
Can't he work his magic to where these guys aren't so affected by whatever it is Canelo's doing, whatever it is Gennady's doing? Why does so much of these guys' careers, the careers he's tasked to handle, why does so much of their careers seem to rely on other fighters that fight on other platforms?
Who's really on the wrong side of the street?
Now, you know what this news means. If Canelo Alvarez is fighting Gennady Golovkin for a third time in September, he's not fighting Dimitri Bivol for a second time in September, which begs the question, what will Dimitri Bivol do in the in-between time? It just so happens Eddie Hearn has listed Better B versus Smith winner Joshua Buatsi and Callum Smith as potential opponents for Dimitri Bivol.
Hold your horses.
Because this is what Uncle Bob had to say about Dimitri facing the winner of Better B versus Smith.
Well, Bivol is a good fighter, and it was a good performance, but Bivol fights on the DAZN platform, and we're not interested in having our fighters fight on DAZN, and our fighters pretty much if don't want to fight on DAZN. My suggestion to Bivol is, if the Canelo rematch isn't available, he should fight Gilberto Ramirez, who is promoted by Golden Boy, and Golden Boy and Eddie Hearn both do their fights on DAZN, so it shouldn't be a hard fight to make.
Gilberto Ramirez just so happens to be Dimitri Bivol's mandatory challenger by way of WBA, so there's actually a precedence for a fight between them.
And they fight on the same platform, so that's one less thing to have to worry about.
Really is a question of who's going to do the show, because I've no doubts Golden Boy is going to want to be involved. Gilberto Ramirez is one of their headliners, after all. Would they just send him off to Matchroom?
Would they?
Let Matchroom take control? Let Matchroom be at the helm?
They concede control to Matchroom and let them be the lead promoter.
I think there's room for a power struggle there. Eddie Hearn himself mentioned the winner of Better Be versus Smith, but we saw what Bob had to say about that. He also mentioned Joshua Buatsi, who was in action this past weekend. And I'm not sure if it's going to be Joshua Buatsi based on Virgil Hunter's post-fight comments.
Do you think he's ready for Canelo or Bivol?
I can't honestly say that right now because being at the world title level, there's just some things I need to see. So I can't understand it. But he's going to always be in the fight. Trust me, he's going to be there. So I'm not saying he would lose to Bivol or Canelo. I think he give Canelo fits, that the type of his physicality would give Canelo fits, and he would wear Canelo down. Bivol, there's some things I think that we should work on some more. And make him just complete, give him the opportunity to win a belt and keep a belt, not just fight for the belt and go back down. Get a belt, and win a belt and keep a belt.
Well, Buatsi would have a great fight as well. War.
Why are you going to have brain damage?
It's a great fight, isn't it? Style-wise, though, isn't it? You know, it's a great fight.
Yeah, it's a great fight.
Listen, I got nothing against Joshua Buatsi, but I happen to agree with Virgil Hunter's assessment. There are things I need to see from a fighter, a young unbeaten up-and-comer like Joshua Buatsi, before I think he's ready to take on the likes of a Dimitri Bivol. And I'm not seeing that stuff from Joshua Buatsi yet. There's nothing wrong with him, and there's nothing wrong with saying that he needs a couple more fights. He needs a little bit more time. I don't think Joshua Buatsi should be fed to Dimitri Bivol this fall. I think the most sensible and sensible options for Dimitri in the fall, since he's not fighting Canelo, would be either former super middleweight champion Callum Smith, who's now campaigning as a light heavyweight, or Zurdo Ramirez. Those are two former super middleweight champions who know what it's like to be a champion and know what it's like to compete at that level.
Those are also two guys that are overdue for a big fight, a signature fight.
Signature win, I should say. We all know Callum Smith had his shot on the big stage at the big show with Canelo Alvarez as a defending super middleweight champion, and he lost that fight, but he has since moved up in weight, and he's campaigning at 175 pounds now. I think it makes more sense to match Callum Smith against Dimitri, who Dimitri himself expressed some interest in facing.
Before he actually landed the Canelo Alvarez fight, Dimitri himself said he wanted to lock horns with Callum Smith.
He's going to have to fight someone in the mean in-between time while he waits for Canelo Alvarez to take care of business against Gennady Golovkin. And I happen to think Callum Smith or Zurdo Ramirez make more sense for Dimitri than Joshua Buatsi. And for Joshua Buatsi, it's too soon for a fight like that.
You can say, fuck it. You can throw caution to the wind.
He can take the fight if he wants the fight, and I'll fucking watch it. But being honest, based on what I saw this past weekend, he's not ready to fight the likes of a Dimitri Bivol.
But Joshua Buatsi's not the kind of fighter I think that's going to end his career as a cruiserweight.
I feel like for the most part, given his physical dimensions, he will be a career light heavyweight, so why rush? Take your time.
I know he's no spring chicken, but he's no old man either.
For a guy who looks to me, he's going to be a career light heavyweight. What's another 2-3 fights to make your bones and get some rounds in the bank and gain some experience?
It's another 2-3 fights.
If I'm being honest, I don't think he'll be ready for another 2 to 3 fights.